Welcome to Lawyerpreneur, where we discuss the alternate paths that allow lawyers to engage their entrepreneurialism and distinguish themselves from others, because being a lawyer doesn't have to mean doing business as usual. I am your host, Jeremy Richter. Today's episode is brought to you by Alps Insurance, the nation's largest direct writer of lawyers' malpractice insurance. Founded for lawyers by lawyers over 30 years ago, Alps works directly with your firm, no broker or agent, and if you do have a claim, the Alps claims handling team is comprised of actual attorneys, all with private experience. Alps roots for the law firms they protect. They believe in your success and nurture your endeavors with industry-leading coverage, risk management resources, and accredited CLEs, offering practical advice for pioneering lawyers like you. And Alps has the slickest online application out there. Qualifying firms can apply, see rates, and bind coverage in about 20 minutes. Right now, you can get 25% off one CLE seminar from Alps. Go to alpsinsurance.com/CLE. That's ALPS insurance.com/CLE and use the promo code Lawyerpreneur upon checkout. In addition to the corporate sponsorship that helps pay for the hosting and transcription of the show, you can support Lawyerpreneur on Patreon at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. For less than the cost of a 0.1, you can help pay for the time it takes in creating and editing Lawyerpreneur and receive copies of my two most recent books, Stop Putting Out Fires and Level Up Your Law Practice. Now, on to the interview. Alright, so you may have noticed that it has been since mid-October since I have posted a new episode of the podcast. Life and a kid that got quarantined from school due to a COVID scare in the classroom and a hectic work schedule have all converged to make the podcast not happen for the last couple of weeks. But we are now back on board with getting your regularly scheduled programming. I wanted to start us off with a couple of chapters from my second book, Stop Putting Out Fires, that talk about challenging conventions with creative thinking and creative problem solving. I think that it's something that is often overlooked, that we tend to approach our problems with the same strategies over and over, when sometimes considering unconventional means may be a more effective means and may give us new opportunities to reach resolutions that we might not otherwise have thought of. So, without any further introduction, these are the two of the chapters to Stop Putting Out Fires. If you enjoy them, you can get the book in its entirety in audiobook form, paper, or digital form, wherever it is that you like to purchase your books. And as always, thank you for listening and making this possible.
Explore solutions by thinking like a child. In his novel, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, Neil Gaiman writes, "Adults follow paths, children explore." When facing a problem, it is easier for us to follow in the steps of those who have come before us than to explore and seek out creative solutions. But it's not uncommon that the tried and true solutions whose paths we are following aren't as great as we envision them to be. Have you ever read a franchise agreement or other business contract? Most of them were originally drafted a decade ago. Since then, new contributors have added paragraphs and bullet points as new situations have arisen. Nothing ever gets deleted. There may even be conflicting language. By the time you start using the time-tested template, the contract is so unnecessarily complex and imposing that you can barely understand it, much less explain everything to your client. This is what comes of mindlessly following the paths before us. Explore your options like a child. As I entered my fourth year of practice in 2016, I was approaching a crossroad. I was either going to continue to be just a good associate, and good associates are a dime a dozen, or I was going to take steps to position myself to be made a partner within the next couple of years. I needed to develop my own business and make myself invaluable. As it stood at the time, I had plenty of work to do, but it was someone else's work and someone else's clients. I needed to put things in motion to effectuate a change. But what and how? The well-worn path was to go to mega conferences focused on your practice area and try to rub elbows with people who might in future send you business. I did that a couple of times and decided that tactic wasn't going to work for me, at least not as my only marketing effort. I still go to conferences, but smaller conferences, and have found a way to do the homework to make those opportunities worth my while. I had to engage some childlike creativity to find a solution that worked for me. I put a great deal of thought into things and assessed my strengths and weaknesses. Major weakness: I'm an introvert who does not enjoy small talk in hordes of people. Major strength: I enjoy writing. For me then, the new path I wanted to explore was blogging. Having a law blog has kept me engaged in developments in my practice areas and within the business of law that I did not previously experience. I have developed relationships and opportunities that would not otherwise have surfaced. My first book, Building a Better Practice, directly resulted from the blog. All this writing has given me opportunities to provide information and data to clients and potential clients, which helps build trust equity. I can't tell you I have clients now as a direct result of my deviation from the standard path, but I have developed confidence and a platform I would not have had without exploring another option. Don't limit your exploration application. Engaging your childlike curiosity is not limited to any one particular part of your practice. You can get creative in your motion practice, in considering arguments to be made in support of your positions, in business and financial planning, and of course, in marketing. While the well-worn paths may serve their purposes, you will not know what other and perhaps better opportunities await you unless you deviate from the path and explore. Challenge conventional approaches. Malcolm Gladwell's David and Goliath begins by telling the well-known story of, you guessed it, David and Goliath. But in the book, he reframes the story, which he asserts we have been misinterpreting, reinterpreting what an underdog is. This is not the story of a small shepherd boy who went to war with an outsized opponent and happened to win. Instead, the story of David Goliath is one of a small shepherd boy who refused to concede to the conventional warfare his opponent was demanding. The shepherd assessed the giant's strengths and weaknesses, and determined that he was unable to defeat the giant on his own terms. David then analyzed his own strengths. In the fields protecting his sheep, he had honed his skills with the sling. He had slain a lion and a bear by this method when they carried off one of his charges. Scientific studies have determined that a skilled slinger could release a stone with the same force as a large caliber handgun. This sling was a weapon of war, the artillery weapon that preceded the bow. When David met Goliath in the valley for a battle to the death, Goliath had 3 weapons and was clad in armor. He was prepared for close-hand combat. But David refused to meet Goliath on the giant's own terms. Neither Goliath nor the Philistine army knew it at that moment, but they had already lost the battle. Goliath was too heavy and slow-moving to react to David's method of attack. After descending into the valley to meet Goliath, David addressed him. You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 44 through 47. David began running toward Goliath while whirling his sling. He let go of the rope and launched a projectile toward his enemy at his only vulnerable point. Less than 1 second later, the stone embedded itself in the giant's skull, rendering him either unconscious or dead. The shepherd then grabbed the giant's sword and cut off his head. David defeated his opponent by challenging convention and refusing to meet him on Goliath's own terms. By choosing a different strategy, David turned the odds in his own favor. His opponent did not recognize the danger he was in and was unable to defend himself against an unanticipated form of battle. Choosing to play 4-on-5. When I was in 10th grade, our basketball team was playing a school, Metro, against whom we were pretty evenly matched. We did not have one particularly good player, but had several moderately good players. Metro, on the other hand, had one good player, while the rest of the team was made up of non-difference makers. My coach understood that if we played a conventional game, the odds of victory were in doubt, so he devised a plan. I was not a good offensive player, but I loved defense, and I was a good defender. I relished the opportunity to hassle the opposing point guard. If I could get a 5-second call on him at the top of the key, it was a mountaintop experience. I envisioned myself as a white, suburban, 135-pound Gary Payton. What I lacked in talent, and mind you there was very little talent, I tried to compensate for with tenacity. In the pre-game meeting, the coach instructed me, "Jeremy, I want you to play defense on 25 the whole game. When we're on offense, when we're on defense, I want you to tell me what kind of gum he's chewing, what kind of deodorant he wears. You stick on him the whole game. You'll get it in his head." I've rarely smiled so broadly. This was to be my finest hour. I did as instructed. When we were in man defense, I was on him. When we went to a box and one, I defended 25. When we were on offense and 25 was guarding our best player, I was glued to his hip. It didn't take long for him to realize things were not occurring in the traditional way. He started to trash talking and getting frustrated. His foul total started to accumulate, and his productivity decreased. The score was becoming lopsided in our favor. In the third quarter, 25 drew his fifth and final foul when, out of frustration, he shoved me and said some not nice things. The game was not much of a contest after that. By challenging conventions, my coach had put our opponent on their heels and attacked them with a strategy for which they were unprepared. He gave us the advantage by electing to put his offense at a strategic disadvantage. Refuse to play your opponent's conventional game. When you're litigating cases, there are going to be times you know the deck stacks against you. Either there are bad facts or bad law, and if you don't do something extraordinary, your client is going to lose. These are times when you may need to consider not meeting your opponent where she's at, but rather begin playing a different game. Consider this scenario. Opposing counsel has an expert who is going to testify that your client is liable for the plaintiff's injuries. You take the expert's deposition and discover there are some holes in his opinions and analysis. The conventional thing to do is to get your own expert who will testify that your client is not liable. This is what your opponent likely expects you to do. An alternate approach is to hire no expert of your own. You may choose instead just to poke holes in the opinions and analysis given by your opponent's expert. What is wrong with his calculations? Why could the accident not have occurred as he is asserting? What facts has he failed to consider, or evidence is he omitting? Do not comply with conventional approaches as a matter of course. Take a broad view of your case and consider all the possible strategies available to you. Get an outside perspective that may shed some light on a tactic you had not considered. Do not concede to fighting in the manner your opponent is demanding. Devise a strategy that is most effective for reaching your goals and execute it. Leave your opponent standing flat-footed, wondering what you are doing as you sprint toward them and unleash the stone that will topple the giant.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please take time to rate and subscribe at whatever podcatcher you're listening on. And if you want more from me, you can find me at jeremywrichter.com. You can also find me on Twitter at RichterJW. And if you want the extra audio and benefits available at Patreon, you can become a patron at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. Thanks for listening.